welcome. Opening question. Well, first, as always, thank you so much to Tova and to Murray. Thank you as always for feeding us such.
Lisa.
Did you meet the new kitchen man?
Lisa. Hey, Lisa, welcome, Lisa. Yeah. Lisa, it's nice to meet you. I haven't.
You know. Not know if you brought it.
So, opening question as we grab a plate and settle in. Opening question is, what is an example you could think of a time where you felt the cliche so close and yet so far? So close and yet so far. Like, where is a time where you felt simultaneously close to and far from either a person or a moment or an ideal? I'll leave it open. A match day?
Yeah, was Matt.
Yeah, right. That's good. I'm going to give us all a moment to think and settle in, but Sheila has already offered match day. This is for your granddaughter who, thank God, has matched. Very exciting. We're waiting to find out where. So she's feeling like it's so close and yet so far, I imagine, because the nerves and the excitement and not knowing where her life is going to take her. So that's a great example.
Yeah.
Keep thinking and settle in, and we'll just take 2 minutes.
I know.
How you doing?
No, I know.
How are you doing?
I have a question.
You?
What was so close and yet so far away? You know.
How was your first?
Hi.
3.1415. I need some to vote.
We went out this morning and delivered our solar panel. And including they were all really close.
I did. And Sunday is.
And Marcy on the other hand, well, is upset. Not only she get a 26. They gave her anybody who's far out. I said, well, if you're a volunteer, you can tell her.
I don't think so, man.
Give me seconds. Yeah, don't give me seconds.
I didn't get my first yet.
There's gonna be Garland's those. She could pass it. Yeah, we're having a fun. I promise. I have a really high. He thought and ordered extra copies. It's not the usual meat base. It's had garbanzo, raisins, tomatoes. Chicken.
I didn't take it. I just tried to decide. There are certain things when
You'll come back.
That I was going. I forgot this. So.
Okay. Who wants to volunteer to share? When have you felt simultaneously so close and yet so far?
Here I am right now.
Tell you something.
Alina, please, and then Nelson. Yeah, Alina, then Nelson. Oh.
I say no babysitting because you get paid for babysitting. parent sitting, okay?
Yeah.
You did babysit, you get paid for it in office. That's,
No, that's the thing. I didn't have much nachas because he's so spoiled and he was just giving me a hard time. So I said, this is my flesh and blood. How can it be so far away from me?
Yeah. So this is your time with this is your grandson
Yeah,
feeling.
he's
Okay.
7 going on 2 because he's one of the daughter of his au pair, the son of his. So he's like a 3-year-old, behaving like a 3-year-old with temper tantrums. I've had this, so I'm so shocked.
Yeah, no, I think that's super relatable to maybe a family member where you feel so close, you literally share so much genetic material, sentimental connection, love even, but feel like we are on a different planet, maybe in
Exactly.
personality, maybe in ideals, maybe in political opinion, maybe in whatever it is, or behavior.
Yeah,
Right.
so selfish. And so it was so foreign to me.
Right. And yet you're inextricably linked.
Exactly.
Yeah, good.
And I love him dearly.
Yeah.
But it was so shocking to me.
Yes, great. That's great. Great example. Nelson, yeah, go ahead.
My story is much more trivial, but I still think about it. I was in high school and maybe the beginning of high school. And I was in a class where I think you needed something like 1,100 points to earn an A. And when it all totaled up, I had 1099. And I figured, but half the class started saying, give it to him, give it to him. And it was so amazing that people really cared.
Oh, that's nice. Right, so there's literally like just objectively so close and yet so far, right? The difference of point, right? A single point could make that also, but you didn't make the cutoff, or I think of deadlines, right? Timing wise, like, the tax day, whatever, the deadline. There's a Simpsons episode where Homer is doing his taxes at the final. He's watching the news report. Always good to start Torah study with Simpsons referencing. That he's watching the lines around the block at the post office as people are turning their taxes in. And he smirks and he laughs to himself. Oh, what idiots. I did my taxes last year. And then he realizes that he's got to do it again, and he just is a minute late, but it's late, right? So there are deadlines where it could be the difference of 1 point or 1 minute, but it's now a different day or it's now a different grade. It's good. How about one more? Yeah, please.
It's kind of a vain thing. I love to sing, and I've been told that I used to be told that I could sing, but I really can't sing anymore because of my asthma. But years ago, I was in a play, and I played Sister Margareta. But what I really wanted, and so close but not quite there, I wanted to be the Reverend Mother and sing that. So close.
That's great, right? So a role that you got, and it may be a great role, but it's not the role you wanted, or maybe the star, but you're so proximal to it. And I think of also understudies, right? Understudies who literally maybe even got the lead role, but there's a very key person in front of you.
But a real interesting story to that. When we did the play, of course, there were a group of quote unquote nuns, and we're all wearing the nuns' habits and everything. And the person who played the mother, she was a cantorial soloist, and we were all Jewish. And before we went on, we said some Jewish prayers.
Oh, that's so funny.
It's fun.
That's funny. That reminds me of, I was cast as the priest in a high school production of Twelfth Night. And
She's clergy, right?
Clergy's clergy, right? It's like, I'd be high priest, and you're the priest. But it was a debate because it wasn't a Jewish school, and so she wanted me to wear a big like Greek Orthodox cross, and I said I just don't feel comfortable wearing a cross, and so fortunately she was creative with me and helping me wear an outfit that I didn't feel uncomfortable wearing, but. It was everything but the cross.
I wasn't going to say this, but it's kind of a follow-up on what the rabbi just said. There's an event, something I will never forget, that took place during high school. And we had I think it was I was active in theater and a somewhat anti-Jewish theater director, teacher, who cast me in the role of a priest. And I had to say all these positive things about Christian theology and so forth, and I went back and forth. Should I do this? Should I not do it?
Yeah.
And what happened? I stayed in. The evening of the play, I completely forgot my lines. 100 people.
There you go. That was your subconscious helping you out, yeah. Ron, did you have a comment before I move on?
Well, I was gonna ask you, while you were this priest, you never had to cross yourself?
No, I did not have to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up the source sheet. What I want to talk about today, we spend so much time talking about Shabbat, and rightfully so. It's so rich in meaning, and obviously it's such a big
And
part.
now it's over.
And now it's over. I want to talk about that period is over. I want to talk about Havdalah, which we don't. Yeah, exactly right. We don't always spend a ton of time really diving into the meaning of Havdalah, but Havdalah to me is so interesting because it literally means separation, right? You are drawing a distinction between a few things, right? Shabbat is over, so it's the separation between the rest of the week now and Shabbat. You draw that separation. By the way, it's just always amazing the way that Judaism imbues transition liminal spaces with meaning, right? Literally, this mezuzah on a doorpost is our way of saying marking, moving between one room to a next, which is the same thing as a life cycle event, like a b'nai mitzvah or a marriage or a funeral. It's the way that Judaism marks transitions between one room or one stage of your life into the next. So Havdalah, it's similar, right? We mark time. We mark it and we imbue it with ritual meaning.
I mean, going back to what we were talking about last week, space and time, the mezuzah separates the space. Havdalah specifics. Does the time.
That's great. So we have certain things that are separating space, like Ron is saying, that's the mezuzah. Literally, it separates space from space. And Havdalah separates time from time. So you could look at it as a sort of a temporal mezuzah, which is an interesting way to look at it. That's nice. Yeah.
It's the same thing with both Shabbat and the day. For example, if you're born or you die between your mincha time too. We make a fuss about what time it is.
Right.
In other
Right.
words, when the baby is born, that die, they worry about what time it has.
Right. Halakhic time is very
But
important.
there's a lot of time and then there's the legal time.
Right. And there's a halakhic concept that part of a day is like the full day. Right. So there's a lot that goes into all of that. It's very important. Yes.
That it's interesting that everybody talks about the moon's when the sun's gonna set and what. If you're Jewish and light candles, you know.
Right. 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 But this deep sated sensitivity to the passage of time is very, very Jewish, right? So I want to dive into our first Midrash. This is from a collection of Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer. We talked about Rabbi Eliezer, even from our first class. He is the rabbi who is like the plastered cistern who doesn't miss a drop. So there's a collection of Midrash attributed to him. Who wants to read? This is going back to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden, and we'll learn why shortly. But who would like to read? Go for it. Yes, you can.
Okay. What was the dress of the first human? A skin of nail and a cloud of glory covered them. When they ate the fruits of the tree, the nail skin was stripped off them, and the cloud of glory departed from them. And they saw themselves naked, as it is said, and God said, who told you that you are naked? Have you eaten of the tree whereof I commanded you not to?
Okay, so a couple interesting things here. One is the way that I've always read the moment where they discover they're naked is that it was about innocence versus awareness, right? That once they eat from the tree of knowledge, they know that they're naked. It's not that they became more naked, it's that they became aware that they were naked and they became ashamed. Whereas just like babies running around, toddlers running around naked, they don't have any conception of it. It's an innocence, right? So they became aware. This is challenging that notion and saying that no, they actually became more naked than they were before. Because before, they actually were covered in a layer of nail. That like they had a layer of nail and a cloud of glory. That's God's presence that was covering them. So when they ate from the apple, sorry, not the apple, it's a fruit, maybe it was a fig, we don't know, but apple is a misnomer. But when they ate from the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge, something actually transformed in them where they became the skin of nails receded and the cloud of glory departed. And so it changes for me the fundamental understanding of what the nakedness of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve, really was. So how does it change your perception? Go ahead. Of what that nakedness meant.
A problem with that, because to me, my initial reaction is, I have two reactions. One is, if hair and nail are the same thing, whether Rabbi Eliezer understood that or not, are we just talking about them being especially hairy? And on the other hand, so what? What's the point? I don't see that there's anything added by understanding it this way. So I'm curious to know what's added.
Good. So that's the direction we're headed. Sheila?
This is, mentioned the fruit. If we think of, say, apple or a fig, is harder to relate to this.
So-
But how did they get knowledge? Because they saw the skin of the fruit.
Good. So you're drawing a parallel to the skin of the fruit with this like skin layer. And then when we,
Realize there's something covering.
that's interesting. Oh, so maybe they learned that there is sort of an outer covering. It's like the clothing of the fruit that was literally revealed when they bit into it. That's a very interesting connection. That's true. And we talk about this at the Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? The different meanings behind the different fruits that we eat, where it's a hard outshell and a hard outside, a soft inside, or hard and hard, or soft and soft. So we imbue all that with meaning at the Tu B'Shvat Seder. Hey, Rabbi Josh. Here's why to answer, Nelson, did you have your hand up or no? I wasn't sure.
I put it
Did you?
down. I think you answered my question.
Oh, okay. But I want to address David's point about the so what of it all. So I think instead of just understanding it the way I've always understood it, as they became aware that they were naked, if we understand it this way, there is a separation between them and God in this moment. Right? That it's not that they are just realizing that they're naked, but that their closeness to God is compromised in this moment because the pillar of cloud, where else do we hear about the Anan, the pillar of cloud?
Bamidbar.
And hi, Rabbi Hal, are you joining us?
One-on-one with you from New Jersey.
Wow. Oh my gosh, so honored. So thank you for zooming in. This is amazing. Hey, oh my goodness, hello. We have the whole family, huh?
Is it dog?
No, not the dogs. Well, I'm glad you guys are with us and our hearts are with you and so glad that you're here to join us. That's amazing.
Thank you. Looking forward to learn Torah.
Right. Great. So we're just talking about Havdalah. We spend a lot of time talking about Shabbat. We want to talk about Havdalah, this idea of being so close and yet so far at the same time. And if we're reevaluating what the nakedness of Adam and Eve was when they ate the fruit, instead of just becoming aware that they were naked, but being just as naked before the fruit as they were after, we're reading this Midrash from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer that is suggesting that they actually became more naked once they ate the fruit because this outer layer of skin that they had, which was nail, the clothes they wore was like this thin layer of nail all around them. And the cloud of glory, God's Shekhinah, imminent presence, the Anan that was right in Bamidbar. It was God led the people through the wilderness by a pillar of fire at night so they could see, and a pillar of cloud by day. So God's presence, feeling God's guidance and presence departed at this moment of eating the fruit. So they become, but there's also a becoming more vulnerable. Right? If they had this, like, think of it as a protective layer, like Sheila was talking about biting into the layer of fruit, there was a layer of protection that was removed from them in the form of this nail layer, and God's cloud departed. So this nakedness, I would argue, is not just an awareness of how naked they were before, but a feeling of loneliness and isolation and vulnerability and, oh no, God has left us. I'm naked and alone. I'm naked and afraid. Oh, well, let's go here first. Then we'll go. Yeah.
It comes to mind so close and yet so far because they were close to God. And they were in this Garden of Eden.
Right.
And blew it. And then became estranged, and that was the so far. And God departed and withdrew himself.
Right.
So I think that fulfills that saying.
Thank you, Nina. That's exactly it, right? That the so close and so far of it is we were so close with God. We were in the garden, and one moment, kind of like what Nelson was saying about I was just a few points away from an A, but all of a sudden I didn't have an A anymore. It's the same here, like so close. One moment changed everything. David.
So does the word translated as nail only ever mean nail, or is it broader than that? Because you're using it to imply a protective coating or a kind of armor, if you will.
It's Sipornea, right? Sipor. Yeah.
That's not a nail.
Yeah, it's a fingernail. I could ask my resident Hebrew scholars if there is other references to it as meaning something else, but I think it's very pointedly nails, and that's going to come back later. So we're gonna dive more into the significance of the nail. It's going to come back. So hold on to it.
Fair enough.
Sheila, go ahead.
Gonna ask you, but I'm bothered by one thing,
Yeah.
and this may be off the topic and you can on it. God put them, Adam and Eve in the garden. Didn't he mean for them to get out?
Right. So then you can dive into the whole motivation. Why put a temptation in front of us in the first place?
The idea, it's,
Right.
you want human being,
Right.
we're gonna do it in the garden.
Right. Right. If God is alone and wants a partner, and if there's this great human experiment to see if that partner will freely choose God, then you need to introduce knowledge and agency, knowledge of good and evil into the mix. Otherwise, what good is the experiment? So it's a good point. You could say, was this all sort of an elaborate trap and it's what God wanted? But I think there also is this idea that we had the free will to obey God or to not, and we violated that when we ate the fruit, and that God never wanted that. God did want this paradise and wanted us to stay there. So I'm not sure. It's a good debate and a good question. Jackie, and then Nelson, and then I want to move to the next text.
I keep asking myself, what is the function of the tree? What is there about this tree that's so wonderful that has to be such a difficulty? Does it have another function other than laying in front, which I think is something I resent?
That is right. So Jackie is asking, did the tree have any other function except to ensnare us, right? To be a trap? Did it serve any other purpose? And right. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. Clearly the other trees were there. We could eat of any tree. It was to sustain life. But the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which God says, just don't eat from that one. I don't think the Torah gives us any other function of that tree apart from a lo ta'aseh, don't do this. I don't know about our rabbinic texts if they come up with any other meaning for it, if anybody knows, but yes, and then I do want to, Ron, and then I want to move on to the next one.
Basically, God created everything. So he created the tree and he created the snake.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he create them if there wasn't an intention of using them for some purpose?
Right. Right. That everything has a purpose, created for a purpose, that maybe the snake had this sort of divine mission to tempt us and see if we could overcome that evil inclination, and we failed. Or if these were diversions of God's will, if they weren't created for that purpose, but they were subverting God's will by leading us astray. It's a good question. Right. The snake was also punished. So you would say, well, if the snake was just fulfilling God's will, why would God punish the snake? So I do think there is a sense of it really was a subversion of God's will. Otherwise, God wouldn't be punishing, unless that was all part of what God wanted and part of the plan. So it wraps your head around it. Ron?
I always have a problem with this story anyway. And I say, how, if man was created with free will, how is he supposed to understand that he wasn't supposed to do something, even if he was told not to do it? How do you understand that there's a consequence of doing it, or that you're not supposed to do what you were told not to do until you've eaten from the tree to understand good and bad?
Right.
Real contrast.
Right. Well, look, I think that so much of Torah is giving us a better picture and insight into human nature, right? So I think these stories are also just meant to illuminate the nature.
Stories, it's Midrash.
Right.
Torah is one great thing.
Well, not every, you can make the claim that everything is Midrash. I don't know if I go there, but you can make that claim, but
I've made it many times.
But that is the nature of experience, right? That there is many ways of acquiring knowledge, right? There is imparted knowledge, there's learning from others, but then there's direct experience. And there's something in human nature that just needs that direct experience. And I'm sure as, any parents in the room, bang their head against the wall, or grandparents in the room, bang their head against the wall, saying, well, I am telling you, you don't want to do this. This is a bad road. It's not going to end well. And yet there is something in us that says, I need to go and discover for myself. Go ahead, David, and then we do need to move on.
I'm gonna throw out this idea that I've thrown out before that nobody likes but me, but I'll throw it out anyway. Talk about banging your head against, well, never mind that.
Are we going to the hotel?
There's if we have this concept of free will, so one of the ways I like to understand that is there are multiple or infinite possible outcomes. God knows them all. We obviously don't. So it could have been that, or maybe in a parallel universe, so to speak, they don't eat the fruit. They say to the snake, you're nuts.
Yeah.
But the problem with that from our point of view is if we assume that they are in the garden out of time or external to time, if you will, or time is not the same concept. And if you will, pre-sexual, which is another way of looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be none of us.
Mm-hmm.
There's just them.
Mm.
And maybe that's just fine.
Mm.
But the alternative is we're not in the garden, but we all have our own opportunity for the time we're here.
Good.
So it's not necessarily a punishment in that respect.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I shared before that there is Tamar Biala, who compiles contemporary women's midrashim. She's in Jerusalem. She has this project, and it's radical, where she's regendering all of the characters in Torah. So anybody who is male is female, anyone who's female is male, and God is expressly feminine. And when you read it that way, and you read Gan Eden, the garden becomes a womb. The snake, a form of a sort of an umbilical cord that ultimately gets cut. And the story becomes this sad departure of the garden is really birthing pangs into the world where God doesn't want to let go of God's children. God wants to keep God's children, her children in the womb, but they ultimately have to leave it. It's part of growing up. So it's less of a sin that happens and more of an inevitable growing up. Separation, which brings us back to Havdalah. But that feeling of feeling separate, apart from God, but also longing for this closeness that existed in the garden. So I know we have so many comments, and you know that we would never get through the text if we lingered forever. So hold on to your thoughts. Hopefully we'll have time at the end to come back to them, but I want to move to the next one. Bereshit Rabbah. Who would like to read Bereshit Rabbah? Genesis Rabbah.
I'll read it.
Great, thanks. Nina.
As sun set at the conclusion of Shabbat, darkness began approaching, and Adam, the first man, became afraid, as it is stated. And I said that darkness will envelop me. Night for me is light. That one, the serpent, in whose regard it is written, he will strike you with his head, and you will strike him with your heel, is now coming to confront me. What did the Holy Blessed One do? God prepared for him 2 flint stones, and he struck them one against the other. Light emerged from them, and he recited a blessing over it. That is what is written. Night for me is light. What blessing did he recite over it? Blessed be God, who creates the lights of fire. This is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. As Shmuel said, why does one recite a blessing over light at the conclusion of Shabbat? It is because that time was the beginning of its creation.
Okay, so a few things to unpack here. Number one, this is the first night, and we studied a Midrash together that was the first night for Adam v'Chava, Adam and Eve, where Adam thought he was being punished, right? They thought, oh my God, I've done something, and God is now pulling the curtain on creation. Right? How would you feel the first night? Oh my God, what did I do? God is mad at me, and this is the end of everything. But really, it was the winter solstice, right? Because nights were getting faster. It was becoming night earlier and earlier, and so Adam thought, oh God, this must be the end. But then the days started getting longer and longer again after the solstice, and Adam realized, oh, it's just the way of the world. So we did that Midrash before. This is sort of another accounting of the first night, but it takes a different approach to it. It says that when night fell, it's a similar fear, but this is sort of a different fear. This isn't so much fear of I've sinned and I'm being punished, but more of night as a time of vulnerability and to attack, right? So there's a midrashic wordplay happening. If you look first from Psalms, it says, when the dark enveloped me. This is King David talking, and I'll give some more context for the Psalm, but I want to point out the word, which is, let me find it, Yeshufeni, right? Yeshufeni. And then if you look later, when it's talking about the snake who will bite your heel and you will trample its head, right? That's part of the curse we were talking about that God says to Adam and Eve and to the snake. It's Yeshufcha, right? Yeshufcha. Yeah, Yeshufcha. So it's this, you're seeing the midrashic move here. So the night enveloping me is being linked almost with like a gezerah shava that takes, if a word is found in one verse and that same word is in a different verse, you can understand more about that one verse by linking it to the other verse where that same word appears. That's sort of happening here where it's saying, okay, so David, King David writing the Psalm, who says night enveloped me, that feeling of night enveloping you is linked to the fear of the snake attacking you. Does that make sense? So night being linked to fear of attack from the snake. But that is the original context of the Psalm. David is actually saying that there is this intimate closeness between me and God, where, and then by extension, all humanity and God, where it doesn't matter if it's day and it doesn't matter if it's night, God sees and knows you just the same, right? There's no obscurity in night. You can't hide from God. He sort of disputes Jonah in his psalm almost and saying like, you cannot run away from God. You can't hide from God. God knows your innermost thoughts. And even at dark, it's like it's night. Sorry, even in night, it's like it's day. Even in the dark of night, it's like it is daytime and bright for God, because God sees you just as well. Just as easily. Okay. Okay, so good. Equinox coming, right? Good. The eclipse coming up, right? Yeah, no, this is very timely. That's great. But okay, so David is actually in the Psalm saying that God is so close to me, so close to all of us that you can't hide from God. God sees you all the same, no matter what time of day. But here in the Midrash, it's actually being used to say that Adam, when Adam is quoting the Psalm here, saying that darkness enveloped me the first night, he is feeling this fear of attack and loneliness and separation from God. So you see how it's moving from closeness to God as in its original intent in the Psalm to distance from God. That, oh my God, at nighttime, I'm exposed to the elements. God may not be protecting me at night. At night, I'm vulnerable. It's like that thin layer of nail skin has receded and I'm vulnerable to attack from the snake, right? So what did God do? God prepared for him 2 flintstones and struck them one against the other. Here's what's so interesting. This is something that Rabbi Artson, the dean of my rabbinical school at Ziegler, points out about this text, which is he compares it to the Greeks. And if you watched Oppenheimer, this is how the movie Oppenheimer begins, right? In the book that Oppenheimer is based on, draws this parallel. It's about Prometheus, who in Greek mythology steals fire from the gods and is punished as a result for the rest of his life. And the movie says that Oppenheimer basically stole this divine weapon, the nuclear weapon, from God, and was punished for the rest of his life in terms of the guilt that he felt for unleashing this weapon to the world, this fire, right, that is all consuming. But so here, instead of our heroes and our myth, but not as mythology, myth as Neil Gaiman would use it, as our unifying stories as a people. Myth doesn't mean not true, just means it's our myth, it's our stories. That instead of it being one of we stole fire from the gods and then God then punished us, it's instead this compassionate God teaching us how to use fire as a tool for warmth, for hope, for light. So it's a very different, it's a counter narrative to the Greek mythology. It's a very different tale about the relationship between human beings and God through the use of fire. Jackie?
I think the fact that humans throughout history have had a fear of darkness and of night.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very primal thing that goes in many cultures and many places.
Yeah.
But even small children, before they know of anything,
Right.
darkness is a fearful thing.
Right. There's a boogeyman underneath my bed.
Closet, Jackie.
Right. And that's why Hashkivenu, right? We have the prayer of shelter us at night, and Cantor Rosenbaum has a beautiful original piece about that. It's expressing that innate fear of darkness at nighttime. David, yeah.
Yeah, so picking up on what Jackie just said,
Uh-huh.
we're essentially a diurnal species. So, I mean, a nocturnal species wouldn't be bothered by night, needless to say.
Right.
So what do we do, especially right here in this Midrash? We don't say we came up with that technology to bring day into night. We said God gave it to us. And we're able to make not the kind of light God can make, but some facsimile of it on a smaller scale so that we can continue to go about things even at night.
Nice.
Night, because we still need sleep, but
Right.
at night.
Right. So we're not trying to, unlike when David says, King David says that night for you, God, is like day. It's day all the time, basically, for God. We're saying we're not trying to recreate day at nighttime. We're just trying to harness the power of light, of fire, to serve us at night. So it's a different purpose here. But you can see that now we're getting the origins of the first Havdalah, right? So what does Adam say when God teaches him how to use fire? What blessing did he recite over it? The answer is Ure Mere Ha'esh. When do we say that? Ure Mere Ha'esh. Oh, good. There you go. I was waiting for somebody to be the first one to bring it up. Right.
What's that?
So Nina is saying, and what do we do with the light of the Havdalah?
When we say their blessing.
What do we do when we say the blessing? We reflect it in our fingertips. And we've all heard that the reason we do that in our nails, our fingernails. Exactly right. And we've all heard that, and this is getting back to David's original question, what's with the fingernails specifically being a layer of, right? That you're not just reflecting the light, which that's what we've heard, that we want to reflect light into the week, just like we smell the spices because we want to bring sweetness into the week. And so we're reflecting and wine for the joy in the week. Oh my gosh, yes, beautiful. This is in Rabbi Alex's office. So this is a beautiful piece that Jackie painted of Adam and Eve in the garden. I'll show it around. It's maybe hard to hear, but you could get a sense of the vibrant colors. It's a beautiful piece, and it's in Rabbi Alex's office if you want to see a fuller version. Thank you. It's gorgeous. It's unbelievable. But right, so it's not just reflecting light. In a sense, we are trying to almost recall Gan Eden and bring us back to that time where our fingernails were that whole layer of protection, and where that cloud of glory, the Anan, God's cloud, sheltered us. So there's almost this sense of on Shabbat at night, we're bringing it in by reflecting on the fingernails, trying to call back to that closeness to God, that we are so far away from the garden and yet so close to it during Havdalah when we try to recall that intimacy and that closeness with the divine. Yes.
We also, when we wake up in the morning, wash the fingertips, not the whole.
Yes, right.
They're cut.
The fingertips, right? So there's a lot about it. So yeah, it's interesting to bring in the wider context that it appears in many places. But yeah, so that to me changes my relationship to Havdalah and what we're doing in that moment, right? Not just trying to reflect light, but almost trying to like, here's a new week where we get to start over the creation process again, right? Day one begins. That's where God created the world, right? We have each new week a new opportunity to create anew and to sort of try to recreate Gan Eden, though obviously it's an impossible task, but in whatever ways that's actually achievable for us. Havdalah is an opportunity to sort of reflect on that intimacy and closeness with God, that God, even though God expelled us from the garden, what is the first thing that God does when Adam is alone outside of the garden and afraid? God teaches Adam and Eve how to use fire to comfort them, as if to say that I'm not leaving you entirely. And that's going to be more clear in this next text. Who wants to read? We're back in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. Anyone want to read? Go for it.
Twilight Saturday evening, Adam was meditating in his heart. Perhaps the serpent which deceived me will come in the evening, and he will bruise me in the heel. A pillar of fire was sent to him to give illumination and to guard him from all evil. Adam saw the pillar of fire and rejoiced in his heart, and he put forth his hands to the light of the fire and said, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the flames of fire." And when he removed his hands from the light of the fire, he said, "Now I know that the holy day has been separated from the workday here below on earth, for fire may not be kindled on the Sabbath day." And in that hour he said, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who divides the holy from the profane and the light from the darkness."
So we have that same responding to Adam's existential fear in the night and of being attacked by the snake. And this time we have, it said it more explicitly than in the last text. A what comes down? A pillar of fire. Because before it was God basically handing them two flint stones and showing them, like we imagine the cartoon, sort of the cavemen figuring out how to make fire. Here it's different. Here it's a pillar of fire. And that completes what was started in our first text where we had the what? Pillar of cloud. Now we have the pillar.
As it says, in Bamidbar, the pillar of fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day did not leave the people.
Right, exactly. So even though after we ate the fruit, the Midrash is saying that God's pillar of cloud departed from us in this sort of, oh my God, we've driven God away. We are now distant from God. God then immediately follows that up by sending us a pillar of fire to teach us how to use fire or to illuminate us, as if to say that while my pillar of fire has been removed from you this day, I'm still with you through a pillar of fire by night, that God doesn't fully leave us.
And we welcome Shabbat by kindling the candle.
Exactly, right? Fire is the bookend to Shabbat. It begins it and it ends it. And
You don't need it for the other things. No.
yeah. Wait, I lost my train of thought about, what was it? And we literally have Adam doing what we do with our fingernails, right? It says here that he, rejoiced his heart and he put forth his hands to the light of the fire. So you're actually imagining him literally doing that. Go ahead.
Is this all a retroactive explanation for Havdalah?
Yeah.
In other words, they have a ceremony. How they started the ceremony, we don't really know.
Yes.
But they're trying to find reasons for it, so they're pulling out these lines. But where did the whole ceremony start?
It's a great question. Where did Havdalah come from? I could point to Mishnah and many of us have studied this piece of chapter 10, right, of Psachim, where does the Passover Seder come from? And you actually have the rabbis talking about how to do the Seder. We say, oh, well, the Seder literally came from this. We can see that. I'd have to do the research. I'm not sure if Havdalah, if there's an equivalent for Havdalah, where we get it, where it comes from.
In the same area, the Sachim, they ad nauseum discuss the order of the prayers for Havdalah.
Right. Right. So that is there you go. So in Psachim, it talks about the order of Havdalah. So that could be where,
But
frankly.
what's interesting about the Midrash in that respect is, we're always looking for the antecedents, who
Right.
taught us this, how do we know we should do it this way?
Yeah.
Where is it in the Torah, et cetera, and so forth. What they're basically saying here is if you read carefully or maybe imaginatively, depending on, or both, depending on how you want to look at it, this comes all the way from Adam. It's not even something that Moshe started, so to speak. This is all the way back to Adam.
Exactly. And the rabbis do this.
It
all the
goes
time.
all the way back from eating that non-apple from the tree.
Right. Right. No, but the rabbis do this all the time.
All of a sudden, he said, oh, we have to
Like when,
Havdalah.
right. They say that, they say that when Abraham bound his son Isaac at the altar, that Isaac said, bind me tight. And the reason he said that was because he knew the kosher laws and they wanted it to be one clean strike, right? That the rabbis do this, or that. No, there's plenty of this. Or when, going back to Abraham, when Abraham feeds the angels, what? When the angels visit the messengers, what does he feed them?
Milk
and meat. Yeah, he tells Sarah to prepare milk and a young calf, right? Go.
It was
It's
almond
milk
milk.
and meat. So what do the commentators say? Yeah, it was almond milk. What? It was a soy cow. Yeah, they say that.
It was beyond meat.
They say that they drank the milk first and then they ate the meat, which you're allowed to do in Halakha, right? So that's how they're saying, right? The rabbis
No,
anachronistically place knowledge of the commandments in Torah far before it was received.
Why we can do all.
Yeah, right.
Good.
Yes, exactly. But that's part of what David's talking about like sort of giving it this added legitimacy or this like sense of even they knew it either uplifts them, our ancestors, for having known and done this instinctively, or it uplifts our law to say, look how far back it goes.
I mean, well, I was just gonna say that there's a tension in this, at least I think for us, maybe not for our Orthodox friends, but we're inclined to say, pay attention to the man behind the curtain, if you will.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say that in some ways, at the end of that movie, the wizard, quote unquote, doesn't do some good for these people anyway.
Yeah.
But they know what they're talking about, as opposed to somebody who might say, oh yeah, it's in the Midrash, that's exactly how it happened. And if I were to say, well, I can bring you a contradictory Midrash, and then the answer I get is there are no contradictions. We're just further from Sinai, so we don't understand that there are no contradictions.
Right.
I mean, that seems to work for some people, but for us, for better or worse, I would argue for better. We want to really understand this.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I love it. I think it can be, you could roll your eyes at it, or you could say that, that's charming and that's wonderful. Yeah.
They need things for everything.
Right. Right.
So they retroactively, I know all kinds of things they did.
Right.
We see them in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to make one more point before I call on Nelson, which is that this idea that even in our expulsion, even in our distance, that there is simultaneously this feeling of closeness, even in our separation, there is this togetherness, right? That Kabbalistically, the expulsion from Gan Eden, the Kabbalists say in our mystical tradition that God's Shekhinah, God's immanent presence, was exiled from the garden with it, or actually not the garden, from Israel when we were exiled from Jerusalem in the destruction of the temple, that the Shekhinah accompanied us, right? So this idea that God is coming with us in exile, at the moment when we feel the most far away from God, whether it's the expulsion from the garden or the expulsion from Yerushalayim, that when we feel like, oh my God, the pillar of cloud has been departed from us, we drove it away, that there is simultaneously this closeness in the form of either the pillar of fire here or the Shekhinah, which the Kabbalists say was exiled with us. That God doesn't just banish us to the elements and doesn't care if we're freezing in the cold where we're vulnerable to attack, but that God accompanies us in different ways, to be exiled with us, to feel that pain with us, to say, I'm exiled along with my people. And then Kabbalistically, it's our work to try to sort of reunite the Shekhinah with God, so right, that exiled component with God, the rest of God. That's where it gets funky, but regardless. So, okay, I just wanted to bring that up. Nelson, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that if the rabbis are willing to write these midrash that traces important Jewish rituals back to Adam, then what they're really saying is that the important rituals of our lives predate the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought them out of the Torah, but in fact they predate it, and we have to accept that.
Right. It's making me think of last in production, first in thought, which we say in Lachadodi, right? B'machshavat tchila. It's something that even if it comes later, it was always intended to come. It was first in thought, even if Shabbat was the last of what was created. Good. So I would like to move on to our final text here. So I've tried to make the claim here that there is a feeling of simultaneous distance and separation, Havdalah, from God, but that is always followed up by a sense of closeness, that it's never fully this feeling of being exiled or banished or cut off. And that this, like what Rabbi Artson says about we had this full layer of skin, of nail, but so when we do Havdalah, we are sort of reminding ourselves of that time and trying to reconnect to that closeness, to get back to that feeling, to start our week with that feeling. But then also the last thing is that when we do Havdalah, it is calling to mind creation, like we do for Shabbat and for Havdalah. And why do we do that? Why do we want to recall creation in these moments where we're given an opportunity to begin anew, to have a new week? I want to get to this final text. This is Rabbeinu Bachia, famous commentator from Spain. And this is something that we didn't get to in the Torah Cafe that I brought for a separate conversation, but wanted to bring it back in so we could, and Elliot commented on a piece of this that he really liked. So now we can finally do it justice and dive into it. Who would like to read? Go for it, Larry, thanks.
The benediction over wine is alluded to in Genesis 1:1 in the word haaretz, a reference to Gan Eden.
Okay, so I'll pause real quick. This is where, again, how do we get the Havdalah service, the different pieces? So where do we get the wine? And Bachia is saying it comes from Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Haaretz is a reference to Gan Eden. So Bachia is saying, Rabbeinu Bachia is saying, just like there was a tree of knowledge and a tree of life, there was also grapevines. So that recalls the garden when we do the wine. Keep going.
The grapevine was one of the trees in that garden. The benediction over the fragrances is also alluded to in the word
Ruach Elohim,
the spirit of the Lord, in the same verse.
Okay, pause real quick. So you see he is saying that the rituals of Havdalah can all be found in the creation story, in the beginning of Genesis. So we get wine from haaretz, from the land, and we get the fragrances, the spices, the besamim, from Ruach Elohim. There's a midrashic play reach, like reach nichoach, the smell, right? The pleasing smell, the pleasing fragrance. Ruach Elohim says, Ruach Elohim merafechet al pnei hamayim, that the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the deep. This is at the beginning of creation. Okay, so that's how we get spices. Keep going.
Fragrance is central to wine. That is
Wind.
to wind. That is, the wind carries the fragrance, the odor. It represents the air we breathe through our nostrils, the organ of smell.
Right, so the Ruach Elohim, it's Reach, but it's also Ruach, which is wind. The Spirit of God is a wind that carries the fragrance so that we can smell it. And that was something Elliot shared in the Torah Cafe, was that he used to walk along this path where there was a vineyard, and the sight of the grapes and the smell of it elicited this very amazing experience that he holds very dear. But also that's like smell to unlock memories. But it also makes me think of, how did God create life into Adam? It says that, right, he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Right, so again, it elicits.
Oh, ruach nefesh.
Right, ruach nefesh, good. So keep going.
Finally, fire is represented in the same verse recorded from Genesis 1:2, where the word light has a dual connotation, also meaning fire, that is the source of warmth. In the ritual of the Havdalah, we refer to the whole concept of fire and light as a separation between light and dark.
Right, so Yehi Or, let there be light. That is also going straight to creation, right? The fire is light. God said, Yehi Or, let there be light, let there be fire. But once again, in a totally different way, right? We had all the Midrashim that link Havdalah to creation. Now Rabbeinu Bachya is doing that as well in a very different way. But again, I think it is meant to bring us back to Adam and Eve, to focus on this relationship with God that we have that can at times simultaneously feel so close and yet so far. Right, Havdalah is separation, and yet on Havdalah, what do we do? On literally the ritual that we call separation, what is the gesture that you associate with Havdalah, apart from this or the smelling of the wine? What is something that we do as a community when we start to sing? Yes, exactly. Right. Isn't it paradoxical? The way we celebrate Havdalah is by coming close. So there is this, right, there is this closeness that can be found in separation, paradoxically. Right, we make that connection.
Why do we sing India?
Right, because so in all of our rituals and all of our holidays, you can find themes of creation, of revelation, of Sinai, and redemption. So Eliyahu symbolizes redemption, of the coming of the Messiah and the redemption. So we like to link those together. Those three themes permeate most of our life cycles and our holidays. Yeah.
So a question and a comment. The question is that this is a Midrash on Shemot 35:2, not on Bereshit, interestingly.
Yes.
So and we read that not that long ago, so I'm not sure exactly where that is, but it's probably something about the building of the Mishkan, which is compared to a kind of a recreation. So maybe that's the connection. I don't know.
It is. I'll tell you real quick. So in Pikudei, right, our Parsha this week, in Pikudei, it starts with remember the Sabbath, right? God says, keep Shabbat, but then we get into the details of building the Mishkan. And so the commentators ask, why did we start with Shabbos? And many of them say it's because lest you believe that the commandment to build a Mishkan transcends the law of Shabbat, so that you would continue to build it into Shabbat. The Torah comes to say Shabbat takes precedence. So you stop building the Mishkan on Shabbat. And that's where we get the 39 malachot, right? The laborers that you were used to build the Mishkan. We don't do those laborers on Shabbat because Shabbat takes precedence over the building of the Mishkan.
We clearly make a big deal about separating those things, the 6 days of creation and the 1 day of rest.
Right.
But so this brings me to the comment, which is, I always think it's interesting when the rabbis appear to be bending over backwards to find something to connect a ritual we're actually doing with the maybe alternative reality that we were somehow always doing it for a reason.
Yeah.
So it kind of begs the question of, with Havdalah in this case, but we have other cases like this, what was really happening? So I don't know is the short answer. And it would be interesting to know if anybody's come up with anything either through history, archaeology, or just text study, or all three, or something else for that matter. But this feels like one of those cases where we had a need to mark the separation somehow. And the rabbis want to say, okay, that's good. But they want to have a theological or maybe that's the wrong word, but you know where I'm trying to go with this, explanation for it.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it feels like that's what this is. And I wonder whether you agree or disagree and why.
No, I agree. I think it's like layers and layers of meaning, right? It's something that is already meaningful, but then we just compound it with more meaning and say that this is, you point to our sages or our heroes or our ancestors who have been doing this for as like instinct or just it's always been a part of our Jewish ethos and consciousness and
I
practice.
mean, the way somebody once put it to me with respect to some of the things we allegedly know about Abraham was, how do we know any of that? And if some of that's from Midrash, it was just made up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And my counter argument is, on the contrary, it feels as true or more true than anything we might know about our great-great-grandparents.
Yeah.
Who we also didn't know any more than we knew Abraham personally.
Right.
But we seem to know more about Abraham to teach us something about how we're supposed to behave than we necessarily know about those great-great-grandparents, even though we're standing on their shoulders and, respect their memory.
Right. It gets into what is your definition of truth and does it need to be historically accurate in order for it to contain truth? So yeah, Helena.
So
And then Larry.
I want
We're
to
out.
go back a little bit. I was thinking about what you said about the tziporet.
Mhm.
And scientifically, when we don't have lack on the tzipornaim, manicure, so this is the entry into the body. We can tell a lot from the nail beds about all kind of diseases and what's happening in the body.
Interesting.
And so I was thinking maybe something there is connected with the tziporen.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And the fact that you are examining that at the start of a week, maybe it's a self check-in. Who am I? How am I? Right? That's a great way to start. Yeah, Larry.
I was thinking, since we don't live in a vacuum, when you separate from something, you get closer to something.
Mm,
You never, if you're moving away from something, to the other side.
nice.
Because we're in a finite world.
Right.
Yeah, so even though it's a separation from Shabbat, we're getting into the separation from God, we're getting into our own identity.
Mhm.
So you're always moving,
Or a different aspect of God.
you're always moving towards something, even though you're moving away from something else.
Nice. So you're always moving towards something, even if you're moving away from something.
Yeah, a couple of comments, one on fragrance and the other on the tree of knowledge. I heard from a Kabbalistically focused rabbi many years ago that one of the signs of the true Mashiach will be something having to do with smell.
Oh, interesting.
For tree of knowledge, I wonder halakhically if there are some areas where certain questions we're not supposed to ask,
Mhm.
certain types of research that we're not supposed to do, that would be contrary to halakha.
Yeah, well, I mean, the rabbis say that the Bet and Bereshit, the first letter of the first word of Torah, has three walls, right? Above, behind, and below. And they drash from that in a midrash that it's because we're not supposed to ask what came above, what comes above, what happens above, what came before, or what's below,
What's
but
before the
only,
Big Bang?
yeah, right. What's now, what's ahead, right? Yeah.
Forward, yeah.
Right, so yeah, I think in terms of, but then you get into more of a medical ethics question of like, what is off limits? And all deep and interesting questions we could cogitate on for another hour, but yeah, so I just want to end there by just bringing that again, that idea of like, and this is something that Rabbi Artson first taught me, but that when you're looking at your fingernails at Havdalah, to actually be transported back to the garden and to a time where we had this extra layer of protection. And at a time where we feel vulnerable, which is at night or maybe the start of a new week, where things feel distant, to try to tap into that sense of closeness and divine protection in new forms. And to recognize that each new week starts with the opportunity to begin anew, right? To create a world again. And that's what the different elements of Havdalah are maybe trying to point us towards.
Yeah.
So Yasher Koach, thank you to everybody for studying together and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.